So today I have the pleasure of being joined by Siqi Chen, CFO at Runway. Thanks so much, Siqi, for joining us today on the Two Cents podcast. Before we get started with our conversation, I'm sure our audience would just love to hear a little bit more about you and your kind of journey to your current position and your position now at Runway.
I am the CFO and also the CEO at Runway, and I christened myself with that title because we extensively dog food our software. So Runway is a FP&A platform intended to make finance more understandable, accessible to finance and the rest of the team as well. And so the intention is to make finance as strategic as possible. And uh, this is the first time I've done finance. This is the first time I've done any kind of B2B software, but I have a pretty long career of starting companies, operating them, and so I'm now a four-time CEO, three-time founder, and so have done quite a lot of work creating models, working with finance, and it's been a very interesting and fun experience to take some of those experiences and try to make finance and the tools that we use a lot better than what we have today.
That's really great to hear. And I love to hear about people who sort of, they've made things, set up companies like on multiple occasions. I kind of feel like, is it a little bit like a muscle that you train over time? Have you learned things along the way? Are there failures that you've learned from mistakes? Like, what's it like the fourth time you do it as compared to the first kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I failed my way up. It's sort of the life of a serial entrepreneur. While all my peers have, it feels like every one of my peers that I grew up with is now like running $1 billion company, and I'm still kind of
Really?
like trying to make it work. Um, well, I mean, you definitely learn a lot. I mean, there's the obvious sort of functional skills that when you throw yourself in the deep end of operating, founding a company, you have to learn. If you don't know how to code, if you don't know how to hire, if you don't know how to do finance and a model, if you don't know how to do product, you have to learn all these things, or at least be able to figure out what makes people good at these things. And so you certainly acquire a lot of skills very, very rapidly, simply because you're forced to. And you're
Yeah.
forced to speed learn as fast as you can, because otherwise you're going to run out of runway and die.
Yeah.
So that is something that you get. But I think the more valuable things that I have found to be more useful in my day to day in this company is, one, you learn a lot more about yourself. What are your biases? What are your cognitive biases? What are the things that make you feel insecure? What are the things that some signs that you might be going on off the wrong track? And the third thing that you get is the right expectations. And so probably the most valuable thing is just knowing that this journey of starting anything, working on anything hard, is going to be really crappy. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to be fun. It's going
Love
to be
that.
stressful.
Yeah.
And knowing that that's the case makes it a little bit better and helps you keep going when times get the toughest, as they inevitably do.
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like that's the thing myself that I've struggled with everything actually is kind of accepting that kind of, that you will fail is really hard. I have been the kind of person in the past, I think, to like hit that first stumbling block and be kind of like, oh, you know what, this just isn't for me. I'm just terrible at this. Like, rather than accepting that, like, actually, no, you will be terrible at first, but you will get better at it, the more you try. Like, and
You know,
I wonder if that's part of the entrepreneurial mindset in a
I
way.
got to tell you something that so I box on the weekends, and I have this trainer I box with, and he's like a professional boxer.
Yeah.
And he told me a story last weekend that I'm thinking about a lot. He said that Floyd Mayweather is one of the best boxers of all time,
Yeah.
right? And he said that Floyd, when he was training, and he was already a world champion, right? And he would have these like hard days, hard sparring days in the gym, and he would say, "Man, maybe I'm just not cut out for this."
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy, isn't it? But it's so comforting to know that like people at the top of their field have those doubts, don't they? You know,
Yeah,
and you just
yeah.
got to
It
push
means you're
through it.
doing something right. It means you're pushing yourself. And
Yeah, I love that.
I
That's
think
such a
about
great.
that a lot. I'm like, what a story. I'd never heard of that one before.
Yeah, it's such a great. Yeah, it's such a great. It's great to remember things like that. I think. I think when you're
Hmm.
struggling, definitely that everyone goes through that. Okay, so I guess today what we want to talk about a little bit is kind of leading on from what you were talking about, I guess, about personal evolution. We want to talk more about, I guess, the evolution of finance,
Sure.
from being sort of thought of as something that I guess just maybe it's just about kind of crunching numbers to being something that actually kind of drives innovation,
Yeah.
and development within an organization. Can
Yeah.
you speak a little bit more about that? What do you, what do you think? How do you see it developing? What have you seen happening over the recent years? What's been your perspective on this?
Boy, can I. It's all I want to talk about. I mean, it's actually a wonderful change, right? So, I think over the past, let's say, 50 years, half a century or so, finance as a function has gone from this sort of backwards looking, it's about more about accounting and accuracy and numbers, to increasingly more of a forward looking, strategic, cross functional role. And I think there's a bunch of different causes behind these change. I think one of the biggest ones is obviously technology, right? I think the invention of things like VisiCalc and the very first spreadsheets in the 70s, it made it possible for us to now think through and create these models and think through new scenarios with these models in ways that just wasn't possible before, right? You have to manually update all these calculations on these like grids of paper, right? And so that's certainly like one of the first big pieces. And what's happened since, is particularly in the late 80s, early 90s, is you have the ERP revolution, right? Data became more plentiful within organizations. And as organizations became more cross-functional and faster moving than ever, the combination of data and cross-functional work and understanding and ability to model and better tools all converged to make finance a far more strategic part of the business than ever before. And what we're seeing now with AI, with the AI tools that can increase the leverage of finance so they can focus even more on the strategic work, has certainly is starting to make an impact. And the output of all of this is that we're seeing, for example, data teams reporting directly to finance, right? So
Right.
finance has become less about just closing the books and making sure the budgets are in time to like actually making the supporting and in many cases making some of the most strategic decisions in the company. And I think that's a sea change in how people see the function, the career paths of people in the function. Accountants are now expected to be analysts. Analysts want to be in finance. People in finance want to be CFOs, and CFOs are increasingly be CEOs. So it's just a remarkable set of changes we've seen over the past few decades, driven by very major factors, both technological and in terms of the landscape of competition.
Yeah, so the ability to more easily, I guess, interpret and analyze large sets of data has really resulted in this change as well. Then,
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's the availability of it. It's also the real time nature of it. You know,
yeah,
you don't have to like wait. Like things are being instrumented in real time, and you can now react much quicker, right? You don't have to wait to analyze the data anymore either. And so all these things has made data-driven finance, data-driven decision making so much more impactful in companies in ways that didn't used to be possible. So the importance of having an accurate model, the importance of having everyone else in a company also understand how the business works and how the different pieces fit together to drive the bottom line has never been more important. And you can draw a direct line from that change and progress to the available of better and better tools and technology for finance.
great. I love hearing that. So we're talking about like I guess in a way like the ideal world. This should be the kind of role of finance, but I imagine sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way. So like, well, if you're talking like kind of best case scenario, like kind of how is a good kind of finance team that feels like they're valued and they feel like there's good collaboration between them and the rest of the organization. how are they supporting the organization in terms of, in practical terms, in terms
Yeah.
of what they're doing in their day to day?
Yeah. One of the things I think about with finance isn't just not about just finance, right? It's about everything that happens in a company eventually falls down to the bottom line somewhere. And so the idea of finance as a business partner to all of the different key stakeholders in a company, from the CEO down to the department leads, is how I think finance can be more strategic. And I think there's a wall right now, and there's a tension between finance and other departments
Right.
that I think is it's created by, frankly, a lack of a good tooling. Because the fight, people have this outside of finance have the stereotype of finance people being sort of insular and not wanting to like share their crayons and share their work. But you actually meet finance people, it's the complete opposite,
Right. Okay.
right? Like, finance people want people to understand finance, right? They want the rest of the business to understand where the business is and where the business is going, what are the key levers. And the frustration for finance is that the rest of the business, too often, most of the time, do not have a good grasp of where the numbers are, do not have a good grasp of where the levers are. And they have a better grasp and understanding of the numbers and the levers than anyone else in a company.
Right. I see.
And from the outside looking into finance, what it feels like is finance is this cabal of, number monks who just like are like sort of like counting the beans, and you have these like indecipherable wall of numbers that you get sent that you're supposed to fill out, and it's like, what is this even for? But at the same time, when you run a good department, a unit of the business, you need to make better decisions. You want to be able to say, hey, here is like where the most important levers to pull, and here's how we can optimize where we invest for the next 12 to 24 months. And so there is a desire to connect, but for many reasons, the reality of a relationship isn't there. And I think that can and will rapidly change. It has been for quite a while.
Can you share maybe some examples of like where you've seen, I guess, like, like a kind of a good case study and a bad case study almost? Like, what have you seen happen where like kind of finance isn't aligned, or maybe the rest of the organization doesn't quite understand them? Like, what have you seen be some of the consequences of this kind
Yeah,
of?
I hate to name names, but we
You
just
don't have to name names. You can say
finance
person
people.
B, person A, if you want.
I mean, one of my favorite examples in the food delivery space, Postmates work like this. I know DoorDash work like this too. And you have the embedded finance business partner, right? Those are examples of really good relationships where you're so deeply embedded into the function that you actually understand the needs of the function. And you can feed in the context and the decisions of a function back to the main finance model, right? That's an example of like, okay, people treat finance seriously, and it's important for finance as a function to understand all of the details of the business, and is able to support the different parts of the business with decision-making tooling and models that actually help them make decisions. And so that's a pretty good example. When I see things go south, and without naming any specific company here, but let's say I've had some first-hand experience, when it goes south is the thing that often is not appreciated is that many different departments in a modern company, in a data-driven company, they have their own models. Right? The product team, by and large, has their own model. The growth team has their own models. Sales, marketing, engineering, oftentimes. And they're janky models. They're kind of on spreadsheets. But they exist. And they exist for a reason. Because you need to build these models in order to simulate the future and make decisions for even your own work. Right? And the joke about a new CFO coming in is that what happens every time you bring on a new CFO? What's the first thing that happens? The first thing that happens is the CFO rebuilds the model, right? Doesn't matter what already exists. It's like, we're just going to redo it, right? Because whatever model that already exists is really bad.
So imagine that
It's the worst
causes
model.
friction there sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Causes some
Yeah.
friction.
Like the model that we already have is a worse model. We're going to make a new one, and that new one is going to be the best model, right? That's
Yeah,
the first thing that happens. And there are good reasons for that, right? Like you want, as any finance leader, you want to be able to understand and fit the business in your head, and sometimes that requires rebuilding it, and you want to rebuild it in a way that makes sense to you, and hopefully, but rarely to other people.
yeah,
And when that happens, though, the sort of the usefulness of all of these other models that already exist, that if that is not properly understood and taken into account, that's where it goes bad. So, there may be an existing model and it's useful. It's not like gap compliant, right? And it may be cash based but it is useful for making a certain type of product decision, a certain type of hiring decision for this department, and they rely on it. But what you get back is like, well, this is not a proper three-statement gap compliant model, and that's what you get. What you lose is like, okay, what is this model for? What actually even is a model in the abstract? What is it useful for? It's useful for making decisions, and the reason why it's useful for making decisions is that what a good model does is it's a piece of software, and it's a software simulation of a business. And so if it doesn't expose the right controls right in the simulation, like games are simulations, so in some ways a spreadsheet model is kind of like a video game engine, and you have to expose the right controls. If the controls aren't there, people can't play it, and people can't play it, then people aren't going to use it, and then there's a lack of understanding, and that creates a lot of like breakage in a relationship. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's one of the analogies I love to use.
yeah, and I guess as well, like like you were saying, like a model is there, some if you know how to use the model and it's useful in terms of like guiding you towards good decisions, then it's a good model for you, isn't it?
Yes.
That doesn't mean it's necessarily a good model for someone else.
Yes.
Yes, it can be I can see how it can be a recipe for disaster if somebody comes in and says,
Yeah.
"No, this is the definitive model that we need to use." It's like, well, yeah, it might be for you, but it's not necessarily like you can't. There's an expression, isn't there, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is kind
Yeah.
of like, I think it's maybe a case of like, yeah, you can introduce new ideas, but you kind of have to be able to like accommodate what people already have in a way.
Yeah, I mean, this has a lot to do with the tooling available, right, and the design of the model. Like, what are the controls, right? It can be accurate, it can be detailed, but those are good things. But utility comes down to, do I, as an operator, understand how to use it to answer my own questions, right? So, let's say, again, hesitating to name names, but let's say I run a retail business, right? And so much of the existential risk around a retail business is around the timing and the opening of new retail locations, because there's upfront capex, then there's a ramp for revenue, and so if a store gets delayed and a capex is already there, then that has like enormous impact on cash flow. And so you can have these P&Ls that are like fairly accurate and across like 12 different sheets, but if you don't expose the right controls, like what is the ramp time of my revenue for the stores? Like what happens if construction gets delayed? If those controls aren't exposed really clearly and I can really immediately see the impact of those, then it ceases to become a useful model for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess things as well, like as situations change as well, sometimes models can be useful and at one time, but maybe not anymore, or in different situations. Is that kind of the case as well? Do you sometimes need to adapt what you're doing or change what you're doing in that case?
Well, yes, and so I think my background is obviously in software, and like software goes obsolete very quickly.
Yes.
They rot, right, and so they have to more or less continually be maintained in order to even keep running, and much less to increase their capabilities. And one of the golden rules of software is that you never rewrite from scratch. Like engineers want to come in, they want like everything that's happened before is terrible, and we're just gonna redo it. And that is basically always a bad idea, like pretty much without exception. But at the same time, like when you change software, it's so much more than changing a piece of text, or you need to change how it works. And so you want to evolve your software. And I think about models the same way. Models need to be evolved as the context changes, right? So when I was appointed CEO of a company called Sandbox, COVID, I was appointed 6 months before COVID hit, right? And this is a retail business.
God, right. Okay.
And so we had no control that exposed how long was the global pandemic going to be, right? That was not a control that we thought about adding, but obviously we had to add that.
Yeah.
And if you think about all of these different situations, that's like a pretty extreme one. But businesses change all the time. You have different go-to-market motions. You have different customer summits. You have different SKUs. And so the way in which you model your business evolves. And so planning and forecasting is about so much more than, okay, instead of spending $1 million a month in marketing, we're going to spend 1.2, right? That's like, okay, that is some form of planning, right? But so much more of the business changes over time. And that's not just changing the number, that's changing the relationship of the model itself, right? The sort of causal simulation, the formulas. And so that's why Excel is so well loved, because you can buy, most FP&A platforms and it's like, you can change the numbers, but if you want to change your formula or models, good luck. It just assumes it doesn't change. And you're going to have to hire like a team to do that, where you can just change the formula in Excel, right? And so that's like the big disconnect between a cloud ERP and Excel or a spreadsheet. And you can go further and say, okay, like what else is modeling about? Modeling is not just about changing numbers, about changing formulas, but what drives these like formulas and relationships? It's the raw data. You may have new data sources, new ways of measuring. And so then it goes deeper and you realize that, oh my God, to really think through something new and plan something new flexibly, it's not just about changing the models and changing the numbers. You actually also have to change the shape of your data and pivot it differently and group it differently. So now you have to do analysis too. And so there is so much more to keeping a model up to date with changing times than like updating some number. One of the things that a good model does give you that I think is underappreciated is, I think it's very limiting to think of the value of a model as like it's going to tell you the answer, what's going to happen, right? There's uncertainty around it and all these different things, and we all know that. But what I think is underappreciated is the value of being able to explore and play around with your model, like to move things around, timing of things, the amount of allocating different amounts of investment in different areas of the company, and then seeing the output and seeing what happens. The value that it gives you is it helps you develop your own intuition about the business.
Right.
Like
okay.
right. What is the rough impact of changing the timing of these things? If I spend more on marketing per store, how does it impact outcomes? Right. And of course that intuition and the model is honed as you operate, and you can adjust your relationships against reality. Right. And so your model gets continually refined against reality, which is an important part of this. But what that allows you to do is when bad things do happen, you immediately can like have an instinct for, oh, okay, if our revenue goes down to zero for a number of months, we're going to be out of money, right? Like you can have a much better instinct if you have a better internalized intuitive model. And that is enabled by having a model that you can actually play with and explore.
Yeah.
It has to be flexible.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I guess like we were saying, like by coming up against that wall of reality enough times against your projections, you get better then, don't you? At kind of prepare for the unexpected. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Like that's a different framework for thinking about what a model even is, right? So I use an analogy of like, this is a game engine, because my background is games. I use a lot of games analogies, but a game engine is a simulation of reality, right? And you have controls, right? If you're playing business simulation, you can say raise prices or create a new product, and some more marketing, and then you make more money in your business and business grows bigger, right? Like you have video games for like that are business simulations, and that's what kind of a model is. And another analogy I like to use for the way to think about a model is as a tool for thinking. And so you can draw a direct line from spreadsheets all the way back to an invention of writing, right? So the invention of language allowed us to coordinate people within earshot, right? And so that's enabled tribes. And then when the language transformed into written word, now you can communicate your intent outside of people of earshot and within the immediate proximity in time and space. That enables civilizations, right?
Yes.
And so you can now, have laws and you can spread your intent beyond the current time and space. And then that the delay and the size of what you can organize increased as the delay between your intent and the receiver gets delayed, gets decreased. So things like the telegraph, right? Email, all those things has compressed the amount of time it takes to offload intent. And then you had the whiteboard, right? Like being able to just like offload ideas lets you communicate more complicated ideas. And a spreadsheet in some ways is kind of an extension of that, right? Now you can offload not just like numbers and intent, but also relationships and calculations that you can't just do in your head. And so all of these things helped us think better and coordinate more complexity so that we can all make better decisions. And with you think about it with that framework, this idea of the spreadsheet being a tool for thinking is a very different model than like this is Oracle for like what's going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. And it's relying on that one.
Yeah, I love that the idea of that of language shaping thought, and then of course these tools. The spreadsheet, we talk about spreadsheets being an extension of that. How they can then train our thinking as well. I think that's a really great way of looking at it.
It's a analogy I got from this book called The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul, I think it was. And the thesis in that book is really interesting. So she observed that the way most of us think about intelligence or smart people is we think about like a Magnus Carlsen or someone, right? And Magnus Carlsen can, in his head, think 30 moves ahead. And it's all purely in his head, right? And it's like, okay, that's like the apex of human intelligence. But if you look historically at some like the greatest human achievements in technology, like the Manhattan Project or something, or the internet, you realize that like a lot of this was made possible by what she calls offloading, and that's basically offloading all of these ideas in your head onto some other medium so that you can contain more context and also work with other people so you have the same context, right? That's what a whiteboarding session feels like. And so a spreadsheet is very directly a form of offloading.
Yeah,
right. You have the actuals, you have the relationships, and now you can coordinate with different people.
Yeah, of course, it's a tool for collaboration, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a tool, I guess, for elucidating quite complex things.
That's right.
Well, so people, we go back to again finance and alignment. These tools should exist not so that they can just be there for a finance person, but so that the rest of the organization or whoever needs to look at these things can understand what they should be, whatever we're trying to communicate, the information that we're trying to communicate, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to go back to that a little bit. We were talking about, the kind of misconceptions that people have about finance. You said you said maybe like be bean counters in a back room somewhere or something.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the image that I had at one time. I was wondering, like, how do we educate people then? If you are a CFO coming in, all of these ideas that you're telling me, they're very, very convincing, obviously, and I can totally see it. But how do we remove that potential friction, and how do we educate maybe like it's someone on marketing or whoever it is, a completely different department, and they've got no idea what finance do, or maybe they even look at them with a bit of hostility because they're not allocating them the budget that they want or something like that, How do we educate people on it? How do we educate the rest of the organization? How do we embed finance further, again, in practical terms?
Yeah. So my immediate reaction to that question is, if your first instinct is to educate, that's probably the wrong answer.
Right. Okay.
And the reason is because nobody wants to learn stuff. Nobody wants to be taught something because someone says, "Hey, I'm going to teach you something. I'm about to like, you're about to learn." Especially something like I didn't sign up to learn finance. Like that sounds terrible and boring. Like I don't want to do that. Um, so I've actually had some first-hand experiences, not directly with finance, but through a different function. So when Postmates acquired my second company, I came in as VP Product and Growth, and you know, I have a background in growth, which is about like data-driven prioritization and all this stuff. And I felt like, wow, this organization really doesn't have a background in growth. And I could have just come as like, I'm going to teach you guys how to do growth, right? And everyone would have been like, no, go away. like, I don't want to learn your stupid growth stuff. Like, we're doing just great. That would have been a bad idea. Instead, what I did was we quietly like started building an experiment framework that we didn't call the experiment framework because people apparently testing was a bad word at Postmates because it's such a brand-driven, vibes-driven company. So we called it a rollout framework. And we just developed features, and we could say provably when we did this, when we launched this, our conversion rate increased by 10% because we had a hold-back group, right? And other departments said, oh, that's really interesting. How can we like do that too? How can we like prove out the outcome? Because the CEO seemed to really like it. It's like, oh, well, you can just use our rollout framework.
Yeah.
And really, it was my like stealth thing to get everyone to test stuff, right? And be data-driven. And within, about a year or so, the organization went from no one was testing anything to every experiment, every feature was wrapped in a test, although they just called it something different. And so the lesson there is like, you have to like understand people's incentives and motivations. And the role of finance is important. It's important for very empirically good reasons, right? Everybody wants to have a very impactful organization that delivers high ROI. That's how in a sane organization you get promoted. And so having an understanding of that and having finance say, hey, like you probably you literally say, you don't say this, but your mindset is like, okay, this person's goal is to get promoted. How can I help? Right, through finance. My framework for software, by the way, is like, why do people buy any piece of software? They buy it because they want to get promoted. Right. Like they think that buying it will help them look better and help them save time, be better at their job, so they'll get promoted. And I think if you come in with the same mental model when you interact with the rest of the organization, it's like, well, how can I help them be more effective? And finance is a useful tool for that. Then I think you can come up with some pretty creative ways to help. Even as a CEO, right? Like your first move has to be, how do I make people want to do the thing I want them to do? Right? Whether it's like work harder or like align on a strategy. I have to, my first job is to communicate and convince them that this is something that they themselves are bought into, right? Of course, the last resort is like, I could just say, well, go work somewhere else. Right? I have that stick. As a peer, you do not. Right? But even knowing that I had that stick, that is absolutely the last resort.
It's the last resort, yeah.
If that's the first thing I reach for, then I'm like a pretty bad CEO.
Yeah. I mean, because you want to, I guess as a leader, you want to have faith in the fact that you can get people to buy into your kind of vision, don't you?
Yes.
For your idea, you want to get people to believe in it. And if you can't do that, you have to get them to do it by force. Then you've failed, haven't you?
Especially when you don't have any force. then you just have like bad mood and a bad vibes as like, okay, I don't want to upset this person, so I'll begrudgingly do your stupid TPS report, right? That's not great either.
No, it's not. No, and I guess we go back to the technological advancements, the things like Glassdoor and stuff. Like, I think people can't get away with being like that as often anymore. Like, it's that you have online forums and online websites now where if you are that kind of CEO or leader, people will know about it eventually. It's not quite the same thing as it used to be, perhaps.
I think what you're saying is true, but I also think that like it's never good. Like, I mean, like whether it's a Glassdoor thing, whether people know it or not, it's just not effective.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you know, who's the most mercurial, dictatorial, like archetypal CEO we you know you would name first? Like, it would be Steve Jobs,
Right.
right? Like, it's like, well, no, you're a bozo or you're a genius. You know, this is how it's going to be. But if you actually listen to how he describes how he manages a team, he talks about no, you hire really smart people and you have to hear them out, and you can't just tell them what to do because what's the point? And so
Yeah.
we actually I will spend hours and hours in a room talking it out. Like it's simply not the case that like even Steve Jobs is like, no, we're gonna do this, and I don't care what you think. That's simply not how it works on his team either. And if it doesn't work for Steve Jobs, it's probably not going to work for
Exactly.
a person who is a Steve Jobs.
Well, the people who are founders of successful, well, mega successful organizations in that case, you know, that they're smart people, and they're smart in the sense that they realize that they don't know everything.
That's
So,
right.
you know, that is really the essence of intelligence, is realizing that there's always more to know than you know.
That is, you know, when we talked about sort of the stuff I learned over, you know, 4 times being the CEO, that's one of those things is I felt like it was my job to know everything because I'm a year out of school. I'm a quote CEO. I have a Harvard MBA on my team reporting to me. And first of all, what? and and second of all, oh my God, that must mean I have to know everything. I have to have the answers. And if I don't, then I'm going to get found out as not deserving this job, which frankly is factually probably true at the time. But that just made it worse, right? Like I was better off. It's a very delicate art in leadership, I think in general, and one of the hardest problems to find the right balance with, and it takes a lot of experience, is when do you trust your instincts, and when do you listen, and you have to do both, and that's a really hard thing to get right.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can't even imagine being in that kind of situation. Yeah, it must be really difficult having that kind of responsibility. Yeah, I can't.
I mean, I think as leaders, as any kind of manager, as a CFO, right? It's a very similar. You're faced with the similar dilemmas every day, right? There is like the thing that you know to be right, the thing that you have experience with, the things that you feel is good, and there's also the reality of also making people feel heard and being humble enough to know that there are actually things that you don't know. And you have to do both in any leadership role in order to be successful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Should we get onto AI?
Let's go.
I feel
Okay,
like we should,
let's
because
do it.
you know, the kind of main topic of our conversation has been the evolution of finance
Sure.
role. How has AI impacted this? I mean, I imagine in every imaginable way. You're talking
Yeah.
about data, being able to read data and interpret data in real time. I imagine AI has come in big time here, right?
You know, I actually would say it's not as much as you would expect.
Really? I didn't expect you to say that. No, no.
And so I've done a series of talks with Operators Guild, which is like this US based non-tech, non-engineering product design guild. And I did this talk about a year and a half ago around the evolution of AI. And the idea was I'm going to break down how AI technology actually works and give you some demos of where it's at so you can make some better decisions about what is useful and what is not useful today. And I also gave a talk about a month ago to the CFO Summit with an updated version of that talk. Here's how the technology works, and here's what it's good at and not good at today. And so the reality of it is that what's been most impactful, like there are 2 main technologies, right? One is large language models powered by transformers, and the other is effectively what's called diffusion models. So these are things that generate images and videos, and that's done through a different architecture. And so we can generate pictures and videos, and they're increasingly convincing, and they're getting better and better. And we can generate text, so we can have these chatbots, and it's recently, officially passed a Turing test, so it's a form of AGI, artificial general intelligence. And if you have deep understand, or at least like a high level understanding how these things are trained, right? These are trained to predict the next token on the internet of text, right? So if it's exposed to 1 + 1 = 2 again and again and again, the next character is likely to be 2, right? And so over time it learns that, okay, I'm going to say 2, right? And if it just gets exposed to, imagine, so okay, so I'll first start by just giving a high level explanation about how transformers in general work and how LLMs work, because that's going to be a good foundation for like why, where understanding where LLMs are good and not good, and how we can apply that to finance today. So the way these models work is, everyone's used ChatGPT, you talk to it, and it's like, oh my god, it seems really smart, and it legitimately is very smart. And so the way it's done is it's based on a technology called transformers. So GPT stands for a generative pre-trained transformer. And so generative means that it's going to generate text. Pre-trained means that it's like this machine that we train with a lot of text, right? And so the way this works is, imagine like it's trained on a corpus of text, and the entire text, all the text in the universe on the internet is just single-digit addition. So just over and over again, 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, and that's all it is, right? And so the way this works is, when it sees 1 + 1 =, it's going to try to guess what the next number is. It's going to say like 5, but then it reads the actual number and it says it's 2. It's like, okay, that was wrong, right? Shit, it's supposed to be 2. So it does that over and over again, and eventually, as you can imagine, it just like is able to get single addition pretty correct just by memorizing, right? And so people argue, well, these transformers are just memorizing things, and it's not really that smart. So the thing that people miss, and the reason why it feels actually smart, is that now if you extend that mental experiment, imagine it's not single digit addition. Imagine it's like 1 to, let's say, 1,000 digits of addition. Okay. Now it's again trying to train on the right answer, but the model size is limited, right? The number of parameters that you have for it's the number of parameters size of this model, it's finite, and it can't possibly fit the memorization of all of these different combinations of addition any more than we can, right? We can't just remember all of the answers by rote of adding 9-digit numbers. We at some point has to learn how to add. And at some point, that's what the transformers have to do. In order to get the right answer, it can't just memorize it. It actually has to go through the process of learning addition, and the architecture allows for that. And so you can send that to basically all kinds of texts, right? Not just in math, but it's actually learning these concepts and learning these relationships and learning these operations, so it can actually do some form of reasoning. That's why they're so smart. So the takeaway from that is that it's actually fairly good at the things that humans are good at, and not so good at the things that humans aren't good at. We're not good at mental math. No. So, LLMs aren't good at like mental math. It's good at reasoning. It's good at like regurgitating text. And so if you look at the most economically productive uses of AI today, basically it's like 2 things. One is accelerating engineering. So it can create like websites and applications, pretty simple ones, but it can do a pretty decent job. For engineers, if you're like typing code, it can help you autocomplete, and it can accelerate work by a good amount. And then in the actual business, one of the more economically productive use cases today is customer support. So it can do a pretty good job of cutting down customer support costs. And it can do a pretty good job of things like automation. So it can read invoices, accounts receivables, accounts payable. So all of that stuff, it's fairly good at today. But what it's not good at is reasoning and thinking about things looking forward. So, if you like wanted to create a new strategy for the company, it's probably not the best thing because it doesn't have all the context that you have about the company. It needs to be creative about this stuff. It's probably not very good at creating a new model because there's a lot of complexity with these models, and the text that you use to train a software engineering model is very coding model is very different from the text that you would train in Excel, and it's not great for that either today. I think we'll get there within the next year or two, and so the way to think about this is to the extent that there's like text categorization stuff, reading text, automation, it can save you a lot of like sort of workflow work. But in terms of creative modeling, scenario work, it's not quite there yet.
But I guess maybe it can free up the space for you to do
yes,
more.
Absolutely. So in terms of like manual time savings as an accelerant, I think it is increasingly capable of doing that. And the tools are fairly nascent today, but obviously we're working on a bunch of tools like that, and there's been a bunch of announcements. But I would say by and large, in terms of actual value, especially in the FP&A space, it's mostly marketing today. But I think that will rapidly change in the next year or two.
Yeah. So what would you say then, like, if you were to look at, like, how do you think CFOs are actually using AI then? Like, in terms of
Yeah.
like what they're doing in their day to day, what would they be using it for primarily to make their job easier? Like,
Yeah. So what is fairly good at is analysis, right? And so there's two things. So the first one is automation of workflows, right? So we talked about ARAP, we talked about even like accounting. That's getting increasingly better. So you can route new transactions to the right places. So that's great. There's a bunch of great companies working on that. It's getting increasingly better analysis, right? So if you look at actuals, finding a BVA in an automated way, right? Finding like variants that are unexpected, it's getting increasingly better at that. And in terms of forward-looking things, I think the thing that I see a lot of value in across any function, not just CFOs, is just learning how things work. And so one of the most effective uses of AI, or ChatGPT, deep research, or whatever it is just learning. So how does product work? How does marketing work? How do the different parts of the company work together? And so one of the things I built is a speed learning GPT called Universal Primer. And the idea behind this is that one of the best possible uses of technology is for you to be able to get an intuitive sense of how these different things work. And the idea is, instead of like, traditionally if you're learning math, or you have to learn from arithmetic on up, right? And then you learn like very complicated things like, gauge theory in physics or something. But maybe you just want to like get an intuition for how something very complicated works, and then you work your way down to make sure you have all the prerequisite concepts. And that's how this one works. So if you give it a question like, well, how does Black Scholes in option pricing works? It'll give you an analogy. It's like, imagine you're like on this random walk, and sometimes you're going to go up, and sometimes you're going to go down. Well, like this is how and the current price of that, the current expected destination is going to be how the Black Scholes formulas work. And so it breaks down these very complicated things into very easy understand analogies, and then it tests you for your understanding any prerequisite concepts. So do you understand options pricing? Do you understand how a basic formula works? And if you don't, it'll explain those things for you too. So it will recursively explain and build up all the prerequisite concepts until you understand the main thing. So this is actually the number 2 GPT in the ChatGPT store. It's called Universal Primer. Go to education. You can see it right there. And so that's like a really good use of AI in general. Just speed learning anything that you don't understand.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love that. Just out of curiosity, how often would you say you use AI in your day to day life now?
Multiple times a day.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
I actually think it's
And
getting
it's funny how rapidly that answer has like evolved, right? Like, remember quizzing the company, quizzing the conference a year and a half ago, and it was like maybe like 25% or so. And I quizzed the same conference when I was giving this talk a month ago, and it's like 100%.
Yeah, it's crazy. Do you know what? I think it's gotten to a point with me now where I don't even realize I'm using it. That's how often I use it
Yeah.
now. ChatGPT is just so useful for so many different things. And it is actually really great for education as well. You can sort of give it like a complex load of information that maybe you don't have time to go through, and just say, can you just break this down for me in its simplest form?
Yes.
That's what I use it for a lot. Like, I don't get
So,
this. Can you explain it to me in layman's terms? Basically is what I'll say.
so there's two other modes of ChatGPT or just general AI usage that are still a little less common, but very powerful. So the one that everyone's familiar with is you ask ChatGPT questions and it gives you answers, right? What I got a lot of value out of is like two other modes of using ChatGPT. So you asking ChatGPT questions is ChatGPT prompting, you're prompting ChatGPT, right? What's really unobvious and really fun is to have ChatGPT prompt you.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you one of my workflows, right? So if I'm giving a talk about something,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell ChatGPT, hey, I want to like vaguely talk about this topic,
Yeah.
and I want it to be really, really interesting, and I have some like insights, some ideas here, and what I want you to do is just ask me questions. So and you pull it out of me, and you can do it over voice, and it'll ask you, it's like, okay, yeah, tell me an interesting story about this topic. I was like, cool, tell me more about that, right? And I'll say like, keep on asking me questions until I have enough to create a very good outline for the presentation you're about to give.
All right.
And that workflow is incredible. Like it'll keep on asking. It's very good at asking questions. It's very good at language, and then I get this like pre-written great essay piece of content that I can now paste into Gamma.app, and it'll create a slides for me, right?
It's great. Yeah, I love that. So it's really useful if you want to write a speech or something like that. It will
Yes.
actually write, yeah.
Or you just want to think through something, right? Like I think the instinct is to ask ChatGPT to figure it out. The problem with most default instances of our use of AI is that they don't know a whole lot.
Yeah.
They know a whole lot about everything. They know basically nothing about you and your company and your problem specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can hack that. You can just have it ask you until it knows enough to give you a better answer.
Yeah.
And that's a really underrated. So if I want to like get a better strategy or whatever, I will ask it like ask me questions and fill in the blanks until you feel like you've learned enough to come up with a really, really good new strategy. The other thing that I think is still, I think it'll be dramatically more and more popular and has been already, is to use ChatGPT and use AI in general to build your own tools.
Right, yeah.
And like, I know that sounds like very fancy and ambitious, right? Especially if you're not technical. And I think the reason why it feels that way is because we think, if you're not technical and you haven't coded before, software is supposed to be very complicated and hard, right? And AI seems even more magical and so it's even more complicated and hard. It's actually the opposite. Like it's actually much easier to build tools with AI using AI than ever before, because instead of like having to write like computer code, right? You can build a tool like we built this tool over a weekend at Runway where we qualified leads, and the prompt is literally, "Hey, we're going to tell you a bunch of stuff about this company and this lead, and we just want you to give it a score from 1 to 10. And here's the types of people that are more qualified. People in the US, people who have like clean data and they're pretty data fluent and they're probably like around at least like 50 full-time employees. They should be in finance." Literally what I just said is in plain English what we fed the prompt, right? And you can ask ChatGPT how to build a tool, how to link it up, how to automate it, and then it just works. Like that is magical technology that for $1 trillion 10 years ago, that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
And now anyone can just go do it. And so asking ChatGPT how to build stuff with AI and just go building it is an increasingly popular and underrated skill.
Yeah, I don't think people know it can do that even. I think that's quite I think
That's right.
there's probably room for people to just be for education on how to use it. I think I've heard about some companies doing like AI or ChatGPT workshops. To teach people
Yeah,
how to do it smartly.
it's very addictive, right? So, I mean, if you're a finance leader, you're used to working with junior employees, right? And you're just like, okay, what do you do to employees? Set expectations like, I want you to do this, and when you see that, do this other thing, right? And you're speaking to them, and basically, where we're at very close to a point where that is going to be how you make things that are useful in the form of agents or AI. You can just go and do that now. It's not perfect, and the tools aren't quite there. There's like this ability to access these different tools and read the context. But within the year, that is going to be a pretty critical skill, and you're basically managing your sort of junior AI employee alongside your junior human employee.
I have two more questions for you if you have the
Sure.
time. Firstly, I mean, this is terrible. I'm just going to put one more question. I'm literally going to ask you like a ridiculously huge question, which
Let's
is,
go.
what do you see the future of finance being? Like, where do you see, we've talked about how it's progressed, but where do we think it's going? Like, well, what do you foresee happening? What are going to be the big developments in this particular field?
So I like drawing lines, right? And so if you look at the lines of where finance has been over the past few decades, increasingly forward-looking, increasingly strategic, increasingly cross-functional, increasingly data-driven, that will continue. And we'll talk about where the destination is. And so what that means is finance will be more and more deeply embedded into the company, into different functions of it. So the pressure on finance to understand how the different parts of the business works and how to be well integrated is going to only increase, and it has been. The pressure for finance to be more data fluent and have very clean data and be the steward of that data, not just finance data, but data of all kinds, right? Whether that's CRM data, HRIS data, the data warehouse, that's going to be increasingly important, which means that finance as a function has to be increasingly technical. And third is it's going to be increasingly strategic. So more and more, it's basically a shadow COO or CEO because it is a maintainer of this game engine, the simulation for an entire company. And the outcome of that is that the lines between, so if you think about, one analogy is you look at how the data organization is evolved, right? Data used to be this completely separate thing, but now data and analysis is embedded into every function, right? It's part and parcel how all the departments work. I think the extension of that is like that will happen to finance too, and it's already happening. Finance is just part of how everyone works. And so in a few years, we should live in a world where a designer or engineer is having conversations like, hey, you know what, if we work on this instead of Y, here's how it impacts margin and growth 2 years down the line, right? That those should happen. It doesn't happen, but like that's what we're going towards. And so with the improvement in technology and tooling, the walls will come down. It'll be more deeply embedded. There will be new tools to enable this, right? And we're certainly working really, really hard to build one such platform. But there's going to be a great number of tools that help solve for this. And the destination of this is that we will need. So this is where it gets like super philosophical, right? So in theory, AI will be increasingly more powerful, more intelligent, have more context, such that for any given decision, it will make a better decision than a human can, right? Like there's no human, if you're playing the game of Go against AlphaGo, you cannot make a better move than AlphaGo today, right? And now just imagine that for like all decisions. So what does that mean for humans? And I think that's a societal level decision, whether we will allow AI to basically autonomously make decisions, or will we decide that we always want a human in the loop, even though a sort of AI decision is more optimal. Like we're dealing with this moral problem today in the military, right? In the sense that, you know, you have these platforms that are capable of autonomously killing, but you know, we say that no, that's illegal to do. You have to have a human in the loop to prove this, right? And I think that'll extend to other forms of decision, which means that the intuition, experience, judgment of humans remains probably the most valuable skill. And so tools and experience to hone that intuition becomes even more valuable in that world because we still have to sign off on them.
Yeah.
And if we believe that to be the case, then the role of intuition and judgment becomes more important, not less.
Intuition that comes through lived experience. That's the thing.
Yes.
Like, AI hasn't. It sounds like a really stupid, obvious thing to say, but AI hasn't lived. You know, it hasn't like had experiences, and you know, that's valuable. That's the most valuable thing about being a person.
Exactly.
The
And so
experience.
I would say you can extend that to basically all other forms of value in the AGI world. So basically, my personal framework around what is valuable in that world is proof of human and scarce resources. So basically, the only scarce resource I think will be basically land. And so buying cheap plots of land in Wyoming is probably, you know, not financial advice. So I'm just saying I own a surprisingly large amount of land in Wyoming because we're not making more of that. The second thing is proof of human. So what are those things? So no one has been the best chess player in the world has been the computer for almost 10 years now, right? We don't watch computers play chess. Magnus Carlsen is still very wealthy and very, very famous because we want to watch humans compete. Yes. And so sports, human competition, Mr. Beast influencers, chefs, all of these human storytellers, all of these human proof of human things will become more valuable, not less, in that world.
100%, yeah. I definitely agree with you. 100%. It was beautifully put. Okay, so I want to end then with three, maybe two or three, whatever you want to go for, whatever you could think of. 2 or 3 myths about finance role or finance leadership. I want you to smash them for me now.
Yeah, I mean,
about it.
Yeah, number one is they don't want to share, they're not transparent.
Right. Yeah.
So there's really good reasons for it as for my tooling, right? Like I've now met a lot of finance people and it's like, no, actually it's opposite. Finance people want people to care about how the business works. They would love it. But why is there such a stereotype? And it's because, well, if you have your model on a normal spreadsheet, you can't share it. Or on Google Sheets, you can't share it. Why? Because you can't just hide a single column called salaries. Because all of the calculations are done in the front end. Right. Because you're afraid that someone's going to fat finger something and you're not going to know if someone changed your main operating plan. It's actually a tooling issue. And tools have a surprising amount of influence on our behavior. So that's number one. Number two is finance is about accounting. No, like accounting is about accounting. Finance is about not just accounting but actuals, but it's about the business. Yeah. It's not about finance at all. It's about everything. Yeah. Right? Everything that you do in a company falls down to the bottom line somewhere. And so finance is cross-functional and strategic. And the third thing is like finance is not as technical. And that's also increasingly untrue. Finance owns data now. Finance has to build incredibly complex simulations of the business. Finance to understand all this stuff. And so all of these things, I think, are unfair stereotypes that is already rapidly evolving.
Yeah, and they're not helpful stereotypes, are they, ultimately?
No.
You know, this is the thing. They're actually stereotypes.
It's unfair. And I think, like, it's informed by tooling is the main insight here. And better tooling can change that. Yeah,
100%. I love that. Thank you so much, Siqi. So, yeah, if people want to reach out to you, find out more about you and your various insights, where should they go?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously everything I'm talked about, we try to reflect in what we do at Runway. So we're at runway.com. And I am on LinkedIn under Siqi Chen, or on Twitter. I tweet under Blader, Blader.
Great. Thank you so much, Siqi. It's been an absolute delight, really. And I'm sure our audience are really going to benefit from this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.